Disciple of Christ podcast. I have with me today Donovan Archie. I even learned your middle name. So if I need to get real serious, I will say all three of them as if your mom is getting you in big trouble. Let me say a little bit of this. What you're seeing on the screen right now, Donovan is involved in Christian ministry very, very heavily, very dedicated.
Yeah.
And you're going to find these links inside of the show notes for this episode if you want to find out where he's at in different places. And the testimony which I saw, I really appreciate the channel, De La Fe Testimonies. And you gave a wonderful testimony there, which I very much celebrate. So Donovan Archie, I want to give a great thanks and welcome you to the Disciple of Christ podcast.
Thank you so much for being here, brother, and for allowing me to be here too. It's a true pleasure. We've had nothing but joy in between us since connecting. So I appreciate the space.
It has been fun. You've naturally been a part of my prayers, and one thing that I celebrate. I'm glad that I get to use the word celebrate much more.
Yeah, it's a beautiful word.
It feels like that's what it's like. I feel like somebody that I haven't got to meet in this real world yet. Get to feel like a brother with you, and it naturally turns into prayers on your behalf and on behalf of your family.
Yeah, that's right. Which we deeply appreciate, and same for you as well. I find myself being in prayer for you as well. So
good.
The love is mutual.
Let me ask this: we want to hear the story of it, like your upbringing and what turned into a journey of faith. But at least give us maybe the 60-second version of the kind of ministry that you are involved in right now in your life.
Yeah, sure. So right now I am a local pastor, and I'm currently serving as a pastor in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, primarily Northern Virginia. And I am in this ministry where I am planning micro churches. And micro churches are essentially this deal where we are creating new expressions of church, where we're allowing for Christians in our circle, Christians that we know, to be inspired, to recognize that they're called by God to, number one, share the testimony of Jesus Christ, preach the gospel, and then make disciples. And since we live in a post-COVID world, we've been exploring, like, how do we connect with people in creative ways, using creative means to help them experience Jesus Christ aside from the big box traditional church. The big box traditional church has a lot of really great, wonderful things happening for it. But I think within the next 20 to 25 years, I think we'll see church trends change. And I think people will develop more communally based churches or smaller churches rather than attend some of these kind of big box style churches. So that's what I'm doing now. My wife and I, we are in ministry in different ways. She's a teacher at a Christian school. My kids go to Christian school. We just believe very strongly being in those environments, growing in Christ. And so that's pretty much just a little snippet on our family today and just our life and ministry. So
you and your wife, and I hear that there's little ones who have joined your home.
That's right. We have two. I have a daughter and I have a son. Our daughter Aubrey is 5. Our son Davin is 2, and they mean the world to us. And they're a gift. If you go back and read the testimony, you'll see why they're a gift to me and my wife, and just God bringing us to this place. So,
good.
Yeah.
God bless you in that. It's joyous. It's
thank you.
It's the most fun that I've ever had in my life. And I've done some fun stuff as a musician before, but having those little ones in the home, it's wonderful.
Oh my goodness. It is.
Now, Donovan, so were you just raised as a Christian growing up to be a Christian minister?
I was not, unfortunately. I'm in this life, bro. I'm in this life now, and I'm like, man, I'm living the life. This is a great life. Like, how is it that I never explored this life before? Have I never received the joy of the Lord in the way that I have now, or experienced the way that I'm growing in the person that God called me to be? Like, where was this all? So it all started. So I did not grow up in a Christian household. We lived in a pretty, what I would call your pretty typical American home, religious / non-religious, a household where you attend church probably on the big holidays, right? So Easter.
Where were you living at geographically?
Yeah, Detroit, Michigan. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. Was born and raised there. And our household was split. So my dad was not religious at all. My mom was sort of a self-professing Christian, but we didn't really see that in practice. In fact, that wasn't done in practice. We weren't cultivated in our faith. We did not. We were not forced to go to church, although we would attend church. My mom, her sister is a Christian minister, so we would find ourselves in church during those big holiday times. So like Easter and Advent,
Okay.
like the heavy hitter times, right? Where you're supposed to be in church.
Were there things like prayers, family prayers in the home for dinner or things like that?
No. In fact, I would go up to my bedroom to pray. We didn't even sit at our table. I remember sitting at the table when we were younger, but as we got older, through up to adolescence, there was never a healthy habit of sitting at the family table, engaging in prayers. No Christian habits of the household. And I'll get into it later, and you'll even see it. But no other religion like Muslim or Islam, no practices of that had taken place in our household either. So.
You mentioned that you would go to your room to pray. Did you feel a natural inclination to pray in your younger years?
Yeah, I did. I felt a natural inclination to pray. I remember when I was younger, I felt I always had this idea of wanting to know who God was, right? Just like how the awe in the heart of children is now, I would always think about, okay, I know if there is a God, right? Then if God created us, then who created God? And then who created God's parents? And then who created God's
You're
parents?
asking the big questions. Ooh, the big ones, got to figure those out.
It's like I went straight for that kind of cosmic theology. So that's where a lot of my thoughts were. And I would pray, like, if there's a God, hear these prayers, from this young person. And so it kind of started there. There's more to that story.
Then share a little bit of that. What did it mean as a young age? Because I'm hearing the words, if there's a God out there, hear these prayers. What did you want to connect with it? What were you hoping to happen as a result of those prayers?
Yeah, man, that's such a great question, brother. I think I just wanted to know more of who God was. I think in me, like I'm able to articulate right now, I think like in all of us is this inclination towards the knowledge of who God is. And there's this knowledge that we don't know in its entirety or in its fullness, but we have an idea based on creation and our intelligence and science and all these other wonderful parts of creation and life that we get to see that we recognize is there, but really don't have answers for. And I think as a child, that was most of what was surrounding. Most of what was going on in my head was I recognize the bounty and the beautiful aspects about this life that we live in. I recognize that humanity is intelligent, that we are creative people. And I just want to know more about the God that created this all. There was, in fact, a time where I felt I needed to call on God the most, and I really didn't know what to do because we weren't a church-going, church-going family or religious family at all.
Will you set it up this way? How old were you at the time? What kind of siblings were in the home? I love being able to understand, okay, you needed to call upon God more than others. Set it up in your life where you were leading up to that story.
Yeah, for sure. So at this particular moment in time, it was during the Y2K scare. A lot of people remember that. I'm old enough to at least remember that.
Technology was going to collapse on us. The zombie apocalypse was at our doors, at least in some rumor circles.
Exactly. Like if you had a bunker built, like that was the place you needed to be.
How old were you at the time?
Man, so let's see, Y2K 2000. I would have been 11 at this time. Still a very young age. Not an age where people were, young kids are beginning to concept theology or concept the knowledge of God too much. But I had this curious nature. So I grew up in a household with an older brother and an older sister. My sister is a year older than I am. My brother is about 13 years older than I am. And so we grew up in a household together. It was my mom, my dad, my sister, and my brother. I have brothers outside of my mom and dad's current marriage, but we didn't grow up in a household together. But I remember during the time around Y2K, there was just this frenzy, right, in America, a frenzy on the news. There was this frenzy in our own household, right? We needed to stock up on food. We needed to make sure we had D batteries in our flashlights. Like, right. So
It's
this is
getting people to really consider the fragileness of society.
exactly. So here it is. You have this onset of the apocalypse, right? Of what could be like the apocalypse, dawning on him, getting ready to dawn or dusk on the world,
It's
and
going
everybody's
down.
in panic. Say it again.
It's going down.
It's going down. It's going down. And I remember my mom and dad not really like running around the house in panic, but I remember them being panicked as the world was sort of in this unknown space. And I remember thinking to myself, well, if the world is truly going to end, what are we going to do? What's going to happen after this beautiful life that we live in? Where am I gonna go? Like, am I gonna go be with God? Am I gonna go to are we gonna just live here on a desolated earth? Like what's gonna be next? And so then at that moment, I began chewing on some of those questions, even as a young 11-year-old, of like, God's got to do something about this. God's got to enter into our humanity and do something. God's got to show me, like, do we go and pray at the church? Do we go and bunker down as a family when Y2K hits or when the world changes? And so I remember being in a place of fear where I just had no clue what would be next for my life and my family's life, and that being a true concern for me.
Okay. Now, did you call upon God at that time? Did you feel like you were getting answers? What happened?
No, that wasn't it. I didn't. I didn't know to call on God. I didn't know to call on God at that time.
The scariness, and you're contemplating the questions, but not calling on God.
That's right. That's right. And I think it is more because we didn't have a practice of it in our household, right? Even as a kid, having an idea of what prayer is, but not really engaging in family prayer, I think added to a lot of the reasons why I didn't call on God, or why I didn't know to reach out to God in prayer, or to begin concepting a conversation with God about the world that is going to be. And so I think, yeah, it's mainly because of those practices that were not done in our home, and a lot of the conversations around God and faith and humanity that were just not had, that really didn't give me that framework for approaching God, for asking more deeper questions about who God is and who we are as a result.
Now, who did you believe you were, like, in fitting in with the world as age 11 or so, and as you're starting to get older, that's when you're entering like the physically young adult worlds. What was that like for you, trying to find your place religiously, socially?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at that time, during my childhood, there was a ton of things that I had been experiencing at the time. I had been I knew at a very early age that I was struggling with my sexuality. I couldn't articulate that. Like, I couldn't tell you that then, but as an older Donovan, I can articulate that to the 11-year-old Donovan then.
How were you interpreting it at the time? When you look back at 11-year-old Donovan, if somebody was trying to get you to use words, what was this? Did it seem like a struggle? Did it seem like confusion?
It seemed like confusion because I knew that, because of two reasons. Number one, I knew that I was a young man. I knew that I was a boy, but I also recognized that I had tendencies that were more effeminate. And I could not reconcile, how is it that I have these tendencies these feminine tendencies as a young boy, being called different names like gay and fag and all these other offensive words that people use to help identify people who have same-sex attraction or who are in the LGBTQ plus lifestyle. But for me, it was just trying to reconcile my identity as a young man, right? I'm effeminate, but I'm also this boy, and I'm being called gay, but I don't really understand or know what gay is. So I was being called all these names, and I couldn't reconcile all these identities that people were using for me, and that I was needing to figure out for myself. So being called names and not really understanding what those names were. So being called gay and the F word, the big bomb F word, right? Those heavy hitter words that we're not allowed to use in our society, but that I was called. And so
did it feel like, I don't know, shameful being called gay? What was your
Oh my
interpretation of
goodness.
because it's obviously kids being very insulting, and kids can be very cruel because we lack a lot of empathy at those age. I'm sure I'm
Yeah,
guilty
sure.
of plenty of the vicious childhood behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, brother, for sure. It was just incredible shame. Incredible shame because being gay meant something. And then I couldn't articulate what being gay meant. But I knew that it wasn't something good. And I knew that it's three things. I knew that it wasn't something good. I knew that it wasn't something becoming of a young man in my mind. And I knew that it wasn't something that would help me to identify with the other men in my life. And so that created for me this huge struggle with identity, with I don't feel like the other men in my life. I know I don't identify or look like or act like a lot of the other men in my life or at my school, and I'm being called these names. So this must be what I identify as. And I guess I'm this person who people are calling. I mean, this person that people are calling me. So I saw that as an identity I needed to take on. I needed to accept. Let alone there were these struggles that I couldn't articulate as a young boy with same-sex attraction that I have been experiencing and feeling, I would say, since childhood, and not really understanding what those feelings were about. But if people saw me as gay, then that was for sure the identity I was to take up, especially if I was feeling those feelings of same-sex attraction as well. So to me, it made sense that that was going to be the identity that I was going to accept for myself in years ahead.
So there was the vicious names. There was you recognizing that, hey, I feel like my behavior's different. There's something else. Was there other things that felt like external forces aside from the kind of emotional abuse and bullying? Were there other external forces that you felt had its effect on you feeling that way?
Yeah, sure. So when I was younger, I was almost sexually abused by a fourth grade teacher. That's not something I always open up about, but I remember there was this time in school where there was this fourth grade teacher whose name I'm not allowed to mention, who would you know touch me in inappropriate places and would ask me very inappropriate things. And I remember disliking it as a younger child, not as young as 5, but certainly between the ages of between I would say 9 and 11. So yeah, fourth grade. This was. So I'm guessing what's that, 8 to like 9 years, between 9 and 11. So I knew that these were like inappropriate things from an adult who was supposed to be a trusted person, right? But even before that, I remember experiencing inwardly these desires of being same-sex attracted, and so I thought maybe, am I being treated this way, or am I being targeted but because I'm like this, or because this is what this adult sees and he intends to take advantage of me because of this? And so it's that confusion around that. So so I never got to the point where he actually physically sexually abused me, but because I rejected him upon that moment. But definitely times where there were very inappropriate things happening and being said that I knew weren't right. But I would guess deep down inside that I liked, because he was a male figure, an attractive guy, right? Then, and so for me, it was that inward struggle of, this isn't right, but it feels good, or it feels it feels safe at the same time. Lots of ambiguity.
Okay. As you're continuing to get older, at what point did anything change as far as you feeling a religious identity? Because the video that I saw, it referred to a Muslim background. And was there a time that you identified yourself as Muslim?
Absolutely. So fast forward a couple years, I would say everything that I explained up to now was my identity and my experience up to early adolescence. So when I became a teenager, I just had begun to really struggle with my relationship with God. I had already accepted the fact that I was a gay person, that I was a gay man. And I had reconciled that I am same-sex attracted, that this is the identity that I'm going to accept for myself. I was not out yet how popular culture would identify that.
Did it feel
I was not out yet, but those were still internal struggles.
Did it feel more of a relief? I'm going to embrace this identity, or did it feel more forced?
That's such a great question. There was a ton of ambiguity there, right? I think there was this relief in the fact that I was getting these struggles, that I was communicating my struggles, right? Like I knew that I didn't want these desires, that like these were totally unwanted desires, but I knew that they were uncontrollable. Like I couldn't control my own desires, right? And so communicating the desires, these same-sex desires and attractions, what we would know to be as gay today, I think having language for it and being able to say that as then my testimony, right, to the world, to secular culture, to pop culture, as this is who I am, that felt freeing. That felt like a relief, because I was able to finally say what everybody else had been saying, but I had been keeping a secret, right? And so it felt like a relief to finally say, okay, this is my identity. This is who I am. You can stop calling me this now. You can stop calling me this now. So that was the relief, was the fact that whatever people were calling me for so long, I was finally able to accept for myself.
It's almost like they couldn't bully you with those words anymore, because
I had accepted it. So I was like self-deprecating at that point. And so it was that, but it still was this struggle of I don't, even though I have so-called have accepted this identity for myself, I still was rejecting the identity and the feelings at the same time inwardly. And I don't think that they were because of social pressures or because of, oh, my family would think that it's wrong and they would hate me, I'd be kicked out. Like I had an extremely loving family and people who loved and accepted me even upon coming out. But it was just this internal battle, just this battle of, these are unwanted desires for me. I don't feel like this is who I am. But I felt like because I had those desires and because that's what people call me, that was the identity I needed to accept. So going back to the religious.
Yeah. How did that translate into a religious embracing of anything?
Yeah, sure. So again, we're talking about early adolescence, right? My early teenage years, where we were attending church occasionally. We were attending church occasionally. And this was a time where, because my aunt was a pastor at this church, and it was like, that's my aunt, she would like make us participate in plays and have us play Jesus. And it was a small family church, right?
Yeah.
Right. But there were still a ton of things that I just certainly didn't understand. And in fact, I rejected Christianity, and I rejected that faith in total, because I had those struggles with my sexuality, and I felt like if I came out as this person, people would hate me.
You felt like they were incongruent, like they
were incongruent with one another, for sure. So yeah. So
is this a predominantly Black church?
Predominantly Black church. Yep.
I wish I got to experience more of that. I do love what I have been able to experience. More natural expression of being involved.
Yeah.
There's
it's a fun time.
There's a lot of quiet reverence, fold your arms in the churches that I was raised in.
I hear you. That is true of. So I currently serve and have served at predominantly white churches, and that's been my experience. I'm the one Black person that's clapping his hands, encouraging other people to get loose.
don't ever lose it. So take us to where you felt like you had to reject Christianity because whatever identity you're now taking on regarding your sexuality, it needs to be in harmony. How did that lead you on a religious journey? It's still a journey trying to find God.
Yeah, that's deep. That's such a great question. So they were incongruent with one another. And I remember as an early adolescent, really wanting for those struggles that I was having in my faith, that I really so deeply wanted to own and to live and to have assurance of, to align with one another and to be calibrated in a way that would give me this sort of blessed assurance that this is the God that I serve. This is how God accepts me. And this is who I am in my identity. And at that point, those things didn't line up. And so I went on this quest to search for such a God that would accept me, and went on a quest where I would find a way to help all those contending things and emotions in my heart to line up. And so I found myself practicing a very, very loose version of Islam. I'll put a pin here to say, my dad, I'm saying this now, but my dad died in 2018, and he's not here to speak for himself, but my dad passed away in 2018. But many years prior, like we're talking middle school, as a teenager, when I first began exploring ideas of becoming Muslim or exploring Islam, I remember bringing it to my dad, and I asked him, because he would teach us a few Islamic sayings, like "Assalamu alaikum," "Wa alaikum assalam."
What was his background with Muslim culture and faith?
Yeah, so you should know that Detroit, if you have not been, Detroit has an extremely large demographic of varying Muslim traditions. So you have Sunni, Shiites, 5%ers, and Nation of Islam. And you probably have other expressions or traditions of Islam, all of which who call themselves Muslim, but Detroit is largely Christian, like split between Christian and Muslim, right? And there's a ton of Arab nations that are represented in Detroit. And so my dad found himself in a lot of those circles. But even earlier in his life, right, he found himself in Nation of Islam circles. And so if you know anything about the Nation of Islam, it is a Black American tradition of Islam that is
predominantly the American culture version of Islam, isn't it?
For sure. The American version of Islam. And yeah, and it's an African-American version, right? So you don't see a lot of people who are not African-American participants or believers in this particular faith tradition. It's largely African-American. And so my dad ran in circles a lot of times with people who were a part of the Nation of Islam, but also was deeply connected to people who were Islamic and Muslim in Detroit. And so I remember asking my dad, because I would hear him use these Islamic sayings. I remember asking him, when I considered exploring Islam, "Are you Muslim?" Like, I think you're a closet Muslim, right?
How old would you guess you were when you asked, "Are you Muslim?"
Oh, I believe I was at least 13 at the time.
Okay.
13 or 14 at the time. We're talking late middle school.
So in other words, it wasn't enough for you to feel like you were raised with any sort of religion, but of course, in these incredibly young adult years, like those early teenage years, that's enough to try to figure out what's, and I'm guessing, what was your mindset in asking him, trying to understand Dad's world philosophy?
For sure. His world philosophy. He also rejected the church a lot, right? So whenever we would attend church as a family, there was a lot of disdain from my dad to attend church, right? There was a lot of rejection of Jesus language, Jesus music. There was just a huge rejection of just church culture and talk about God, right? There was a limit to which God could be talked about in our home, which wasn't even still a lot, right? And I will add that I grew up in a very superstitious household as well. Now, this is no judgment to my parents, right? A lot and a ton of love to them. And
I'm pretty sure everybody listening to this, they know the quirks of their own families, and I'm sure I'm going to have my own quirks that my kids are going to talk about someday.
That's right. That's right. So we lived in a superstitious household, right? So like playing the lottery, like my family had lottery books that, I mean, like down to the science and down to the number, they would try to figure out like how to beat this game of chance or how to play the game of chance. They believed a lot in luck. They believed a lot in various forms of superstition. So this was sort of the household that I grew up in, a very superstitious household, but then also a very just non-religious household. So at this point where I'm asking my dad about his faith, I remember he stopped for a moment and I asked him, "Are you Muslim?" And he just stopped, paused for a moment, and eventually answered, "Yeah." Like, yeah, he said, I think so. I think I am. And then I remember telling him, I think you're sort of a closet Muslim, because I hear you use these sayings, like you are so deeply passionate about like the Nation of Islam. He loves Malcolm X. He loved Malcolm X, loved the Nation of Islam, appreciated the faith tradition, and almost would smile ear to ear if ever we watched something and we would there would be mentions of Islamic or Muslim culture or practice. So I just began to pay attention to what interested him as it related to his faith and to what his personal beliefs were. And then I finally concluded as a teenager that this guy is Muslim. So my journey after that was how here it is, was how is it that I grow closer to my dad? Right? We grew up in the same household, very loving dad, like a tremendous stand-up guy, right? A great guy. But here I am wanting to like reconcile my life, right? But then I'm also wanting for me and my dad to develop a closer relationship. And we were pretty close, but I felt like there was more we could do. He was a big introvert, so that could have added to a lot of the reasons why we didn't form that strong of a bond, although we were really close. But I thought that me becoming Islamic or Muslim would draw us closer together. And you know what? It did. It did. Okay. I began practicing Islam in a way that was consistent with outward practices. So like washing your hands before and after meals or before you pray, the consecrations before prayer, saying the Shahada, which is like the faith prayer, and going to, begging. Say it again.
Were you dedicated at how many times a day you would pray and facing east?
Oh yeah, facing east, praying 5 times a day during the months of Ramadan, trying to be very intentional about fasting, right? Not really making a pilgrimage to Mecca, but because we couldn't get there, I wasn't able to get there. But like making pilgrimages to Mecca, back to like the Holy Land, not the Christian Holy Land, but even some of the other practices, like I developed a very strict Muslim diet as well. I stopped consuming pork for a very long time. Even in my household today, like there are still remnants of my practices in Islam that are still pretty evident. And that's mainly dietary. That's not like I'm praying on a rug 5 times a day or, or reading the Quran.
Now, you were definitely feeling a greater closeness to your father. Were you noticing any greater closeness to God because of those observances?
No closeness to God, but I will say that I did feel like a good religious person. And I think that made me feel justified in my relationship with God and justified in my identity, right? So as I was practicing my version of Islam, which is a very unorthodox iteration of Islam, I begin to understand, like, if I am making these attempts and if I am really practicing it this way, and I'm pleasing God, like I don't feel any weight on my shoulder. Like I didn't feel a need to even in some of the struggles that I was having internally with my sexuality, I didn't feel convicted or ashamed. I didn't feel like God hated me, right? But I also didn't feel connected to God. So there you have it. I didn't feel God, but I also felt like God didn't hate me, and it probably was because God wasn't God is everywhere, but it probably was because there was I don't know, there wasn't this connection to God that I was seeking to make. It was really more about what I could do for God. It was all performative. It was all works theology, right? It was like, what could I do to be more loving and gracious and kind and submissive to God? Like, what is it that I could do to get God's attention? Or what can I do to like get into the presence of God, and how can I perform to do that? And I think that's what my faith became more about, even wanting to identify as a Muslim at the time.
I think there's a lot of comfort that happens for people in general to where, hey, I got a religious routine. It's tried and true, isn't it? There's millions, if not billions, of people doing something similar to this.
Yep.
I should be good.
I should be good, right? There's like no one's upset about it. No one's saying anything. Like, hey, it is in fact that, Jacob. It was a routine.
Yeah.
It was a routine. It was a practice. It was all works. It was all based off works.
Well, let me ask this. In general, people consider you a good person in not a religious way if, hey, this person's honest, they don't try to take advantage of others, they help the old ladies with their groceries or other service opportunities. In general, those are the standards by which we're viewed as good people. It sounds like you weren't having the street criminality type minded sort of behavior. Your behavior would be considered good by other members of the community.
Yeah, I was cutting the grass and I was helping. Yeah, I mentioned before I was selling candy to old ladies and helping. I mean, I was a really great guy, really great kid. Yeah, I was. And most of my goodness I attributed to being Muslim and being Islam. And so all of that was just kind of my self-profession of I'm Muslim, I'm Islam. I have this set of practices that I have in my life, and I'm making these attempts to understand the Quran and to believe, although I don't feel like it's taking shape in my heart. And because of that, I feel like I'm this good person and I'm this really wonderful guy. And that's what being a good Muslim is all about. I think and in fact, it wasn't. That's not what it's all about, in fact.
In other words, you got the performances down, but even by Muslim standards, you realized that you weren't making it.
I weren't making it.
Fast forward us to as you're continuing young adult life for Donovan Archie. What happened to where maybe it's not time for this part of the story yet, but I remember you had a dream and you called upon God. Is it time for us to hear that, or is there more setup that we need for people to understand what was going on in your journey?
I would say one more part, and then I can get into the mark where that dream happened, at the time where that dream happened. So this had been my life for this whole Muslim experience, and not really even, and at this time I wasn't practicing homosexuality, right? I still did identify as gay.
Did your parents know or ever talk to you about it?
My sexuality or Islam?
Your sexuality.
No, they didn't. This was never something we talked about. My sexuality never came up until my senior year of high school. And it came up because my circle was clear, right? The people that I was running with were identifiably gay, were proud about their practice. They had begun having sex and practicing homosexuality way earlier than I was asked, rather than I wanted to, or didn't really want to, but just I knew I had these ideas, but they had already started practicing.
Did you feel more comfortable around them?
Oh, for sure. It was a community at that time, right? And most of the reason why we were friends, and we were genuinely friends, right? This wasn't if we were genuinely friends the way that you could genuinely love and be friends with the person, right?
How big was your high school, and was it predominantly a black high school or more mixed?
Predominantly black school. Detroit is pretty diverse, and we were the high school that I attended is situated in literally one of the most diverse neighborhoods in Detroit. So you're talking again a very large Muslim and Arabic demographic, white, Korean, Asian, and largely black. But my high school certainly was largely black. The population of my school, I think, was around 500 students, and that's small. Like there were 128 students in my graduating senior class. So there's 128 students in each grade level. So you're talking a little over 500-600 people in the school. So, but I went to a college preparatory school. College preparatory school, wonderful, wonderful school. And in this particular community, there were only two individuals who identified as gay. One was myself, but I wasn't out yet, and then another was out and was very prideful about his identity and open and out. And he was my first connection, my first personal friend that would first befriend me, who would befriend me, help me to kind of navigate high school as a gay person, but not really out yet. And
because I'm sure there's all of us, especially at those ages, feel the longing for social acceptance and at least to understand, even those who aren't pursuing being popular, we want to at least
have some sort of acceptance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But would you say that's what was appealing about that friendship mostly? Because
big time.
Okay.
Big time. But because again, you got to remember in my story, I am the kid in the neighborhood, one of the kids in the neighborhood, but for sure one of the kids in the neighborhood who presents as gay, who is a little bit feminine than the other boys. So I'm sort of the sore thumb. I'm that kid.
Clothing choices, the way that you interacted, or
I think it was just all mannerism, right? It was basically mannerism, the way I talked, the way I walked. I also should add that I danced as well. So when I walk, my chest is very high. So even my posture always is very calculated. It's very stacked.
Was there any formal training as a dancer?
Say that one more time.
Did you have any formal training as a dancer?
Formal training as a dancer in Detroit, in some Detroit dance schools. At my high school, even throughout college, I danced with the dance company. So I would say about a good solid 11 to 13 years of my life have been various art forms and expressions of dance. So
at least hit us with this. What kind of music did you find most inspiring for your dance?
I would say jazz, because I enjoyed jazz dance the most, and modern dance. And that was and that's like more lyrical, modern. So I would say jazz music, but then also any type of soul expression. So like neo soul or R&B, instrumental type songs were always good. And even some classical music too, where I did ballet, I found to be okay. It wasn't my favorite, but we performed to classical music. So,
but the fact that you're loving it and getting some formal training in dance, that's another thing that I know that the boys who are trying to present the masculine stereotypical, that's going to be like, hey, who's this Donovan guy?
Like, what is he doing? Right?
The way he walks.
Yeah. He dances. He like that. Those are all grounds for gay, right? Those were all grounds for gay.
That age, it's harsh. Like, I've got some horror stories. Like, I made teachers quit before, but it's like you're making me have some flashbacks of just that lack of empathy that I know is so common for us as young people.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So I really needed that social acceptance in high school, and I got it. And then there were more kids that joined the school as I went throughout my journey in high school, and I created a friend group there, mostly people who were all either lesbian or gay. And we were the lesbian gay group, although I didn't really form a community. Like I'm more kind of, I can be with any group of people. And so, but that was my community. That was my community. And so
were you always social with others? Because always. Yeah. Okay. Very good.
Always
social with others. Good.
Yeah. Always. So that was my community. And so I'm going to fast forward a little bit, because most of it is kind of the same. It's just, I found a community, social acceptance through them. We did a ton of stuff together. We were in bars and balls. And I mean, we really lived our life as gay men and women, right? So we delved deeply into the lifestyle. So this isn't a lifestyle like how Islam, I kind of touched and kind of perused around a little bit. This was actually a lifestyle that I delved deeply into.
Did it feel a sense of like a rebellion? I'll show you, or what did it feel?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. A ton of rebellion. But at the same, but the way that the rebellion came out was in I do not want to be inflammatory, right, Jacob?
I'll go
But
for it.
a
Go
lot
for
of the,
it.
say it again.
Go for it. They can just blame you inside of the comments section. I get it a time or two as well. In other words, let me give a recommendation. Just hit with the sincerity. Put the sincerity above the feelings, because I get from you, and I believe others get from you, that you're not looking to make anybody feel bad. But if you have to give it more blunt than you're thinking, do it.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate that. So a lot of the rebellion in my deep dive into the lifestyle was two things. I would say pure curiosity, right? That is a human trait. That's a human characteristic, curiosity, right? But it's also curiosity that I see, and I'm speaking now, it's also curiosity that leads to some dangerous places, right? And biblically, we see that curiosity led to pride,
Yeah.
with the state of humanity. And so a lot of my curiosity at the time, it led to rebellion. And then that rebellion presented itself as pride. Does that make sense?
No, I'm getting you, but I'm also lacking the words, because I'm getting a feeling that I think I'm identifying with what you're saying. Did it feel like, okay, when you're involved in the actions, the party lifestyle, the full on gay lifestyle, we're living it, embracing it? Did it feel like an unwillingness to acknowledge you were behaving inappropriately and instead just kind of double down on it?
Yes, because for me, this was what came along with my identity. This is what I understood and I felt came along with my
Kind of like,
identity.
I signed up for this. This is my choice.
This is my choice. And because socially, there is sort of this, you become like a social recluse, right? You become pushed to the margins, right? And any community that's pushed to the margins eventually gets to the point where they push back against the community or the demographic or the people or person that's pushing them into the margins, right? Yeah. And so because socially, I was a part of this community that was pushed to the margins, a lot of what I was feeling, a lot of the rebellion, a lot of the deep diving into the lifestyle was rejecting those people who were pushing me into the margins, was like a stand up against those people who disliked me, who didn't agree with me, who didn't accept me. And so it was coming out as rebellion, but that rebellion turned into like this sense of pride for me. Like, I have to be prideful about the person that I am. I have to develop this sense of acceptance and like strong acceptance of who I am. If I am to be this, if I'm to really take this lifestyle on, I've got to really own it in a way that forsakes everything else.
Yeah. In other words, jumping in full force.
Full force.
At what point did you feel like things were going wrong? And let me just tell you what's popping into my mind. I know there's certain people who get involved in criminal actions that they really start to enjoy the power that happens by somebody being scared that they're going to rob them or beat them up or something to that effect. They start to feel a satisfaction in something that at one point they knew was wrong. Were you feeling any of those changes to where, hey, I know this is wrong, but I'm leaning into it anyway?
I did, because again, here it is. I'm having this struggle with my, not only with my sexuality, but with my identity. I am a ball of confusion, right? And I am not diagnosed as a person to have mental health issues, right? Because I don't. But there is sort of this social and emotional, there's this wrestling that's taking place, right, with my identity.
Some sort of grinding of the gears. It just doesn't seem to be running smooth.
It does not appear to be running smoothly, right? And I'm trying to figure it all out. And here I am accepting all these identities, right? So I am a Muslim, and and I'm also and I'm also gay, and I'm also, so it's this acceptance of all these identities, and I'm like, what am I doing? So so I carry that to college, and if you know, say it again.
So what college? And I'm guessing you're taking this into your 20s now.
I'm taking this into into college, into my 20s. And I go to school at Alabama State. This is a historically Black college. And I take my religion and I take my sexuality with me. Right. So I take all of my practices, and I remember, and I have mentors who can affirm this story. Right. So I can't make any of this up.
Let me mention this. Tell me if this is accurate. There was probably a lot more liberty to openly live out a homosexual lifestyle at the university.
Well, no. So you're talking about, so on most college campuses, yes. At a lot of, I would say at a lot of college campuses,
but not
yes.
this one.
Not in Alabama, right?
It's still, I'm guessing it's still the Deep South.
It's still the Deep South, right?
Yeah.
But although there were a ton of gay students on the campus, right? So there was a very large demographic of LGBTQ plus youth, young adults on the campus, and there is sort of this element of acceptance. But because of the dynamic of Deep South, you do get this dynamic of, I'm gay, and so I don't care what you think, but because I'm still going to live this lifestyle. There's still like this social tension between the identities and between these people. And so it's like, yes, like a regular college campus, like I'm going to lean into this identity and, be for all these movements, but it is very much so conservative as well. So.
Okay.
So I go to college and I take my identities with me. I take my passions. I take everything. That's right. I take all this stuff with me.
I got that one. They're mine. I'm taking them.
And I'm going to bring people with me. And so I prided myself in, I'm just going to tell the truth. I prided myself in wanting other people to be gay as well. That was something I felt like was my personal mission. Like, hey, if you want to experience this lifestyle, like, I'm the person to help you do it. Like we have fun, and we have fun.
As you look back now, was it kind of getting validation by others, at least testing it out or maybe even embracing it?
Say that one more time.
Did it seem like you were getting validation if other people were embracing that lifestyle as well?
Yes, for sure. For sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. For sure. So here it is. I'm encouraging, like, anybody who wants to be gay, I can be your way, right? That type of thing. But then it's also this identity of Islam that I'm carrying with me, and of being Muslim. And I remember preaching this sort of Islamic gospel of, like, there's only one God, and that God is Allah. And right. And really helping people who are Christian. And this is the South, the Bible Belt, right? So anytime I'm hearing anything about Christianity, I'm contending with those people with what I know about the Islamic faith, the Islamic tradition. I'm constantly getting into arguments with people and fights. I am debunking Trinitarian theology.
Ooh,
right?
Goodness.
So here it is. You have this Islamic apologetic, right? Who is telling people that they're wrong about this tripart God that they serve, and that they have a monotheistic faith. I mean, that they have a polytheistic faith, and they need to come to the real one true God who is found in Allah. And that was my understanding of who God was. I was more comfortable with that. When you're thinking about theological mathematics, that makes sense. When you're thinking about it logically, like, oh yeah, one God. Okay, that makes sense. So that seemed like easy theology for people to roll with. And that was like my easy target, right? And then being able to debunk a lot of the miracle stories of Jesus, being able to debunk Trinitarian theology and a lot of Christology too, was super easy. You could poke holes in a lot of that stuff, right?
If you are a minority in your religious beliefs, you got to be sharp to be able to roll in communities of discussion where yours is the minority opinion.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I've always been that guy, right? Not rebellious, but the person who was the sore thumb, from my sexual identity to my, how I didn't really understand my own gender identity, to my spiritual and religious identity as well. So it's all a ball of confusion. So I'll hit fast forward a bit. So I have this experience in college. I was invited to church, and I think this is part of the testimony which people will be forwarded to. But I was invited to church by a person who I ran in circles with. I was friends with a ton of people at that time. There is a large LGBTQ plus community within churches. You should know that. That's not a secret, right? And so even in church, with individuals who are attending church, they love church. In the Black church, it's a very large community. It's not a community that is talked about a lot or that is acknowledged, right? So we don't have a lot of discussions about individuals who are LGBT. We just accept them and we say nothing about them, and they better not say anything either. That's kind of like how it goes.
Almost like a don't ask, don't tell policy.
Don't ask, don't tell. It's just like come to church, sing in the choir, and then like eat pie and go home.
I feel cheated for not getting pie growing up.
That's right. All right. So that's sort of what it is in the Black church and in lots of other churches as well. But I was asked by a friend of mine who had attended church, who was also gay, to come to church. And he had known that I was a dancer, and he asked, "Oh, could you show up and dance?" Like maybe I think an act had got dropped at church or something. I'm not sure. But he asked me if I could come in and fill in for a person who didn't show up or who wasn't going to show up. And I said, well, yeah, I'll go to church just as long as you don't expect me to like go and pray and become a Christian, and don't expect me to participate. Like I'm going to come dance. I'm going to come watch you, and we're going to go.
He's giving you gateway drugs to Jesus.
Gateway drugs to Jesus. And this is as a gay man. This is a gay man who did this, right?
Okay.
Who brought me to church. And I remember, it's so interesting. I remember the sermon that I heard. It was Restoration of the Gatekeepers. The message that was preached by the guest pastor at this. I think they were having a revival at the time. And whoever the preacher was preached this message about how God is restoring the people who God has called and has given God his own name. And people who were at least curious about God, or people who really were searching for God. Those were people who God was pursuing with his prevenient love and grace. And like he was really seeking to restore and to regenerate and to bring new life to, and to really have them to be made new and to be reborn. And I remember hearing that message, thinking that I was one of those gatekeepers, right? One of the people who wanted to deeply know and serve God, but didn't know how to do it. I knew that I was going to be one of those people, but I didn't know how to do it. And so I still rejected the church. I still rejected Christ. I still rejected a lot of it because I didn't understand it. But I remember in that moment knowing that I was one of God's gatekeepers, that I was a gatekeeper to God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven, right? I knew that the kingdom of God that is on this earth, that is going to help reach people and transform lives, and to have the work done on me first, to be renewed and transformed. Like the person who's confused and who's needing this washing, and who's needing to be made clear, and who's needed to be made new. Like God is going to do a work in you, but then God is going to do a work with you. And I was fully confident that I was one of God's gatekeepers. And sure enough, after that church service, I had gone back to my dorm room, and I won't tell the whole dream, maybe because I want people to go and watch it on DeLoff Testimonies or DLFA Testimonies.
Well, I promise I'm putting the link in there. Hit us with the full hot sauce. Spare not.
Okay, yeah, sure. So
if this is taking place in the Deep South, we need the hot sauce.
That's right. You better have hot sauce. You better have hot sauce. So I go back to my dorm room, and I lay down for the night. Like I go to sleep, and I have a dream. And in my dream, I am laying down just as I did that day. I'm asleep, but I'm also waking back up. But I'm not waking up from my dream. This is all happening in my dream. So I'm waking back up, and I can't get out of the bed. Like I'm like almost slammed down back to the bed as I'm trying to get up. And I remember the room overheating. I remember myself beginning to overheat. And I remember developing this extremely bad headache. And I'm feeling horrible. I also feel very stuck to the bed. So I'm trying to get up and I can't move. And so I'm sleeping with my back like towards the rest of my room, kind of like how it is now. So like I'm sleeping my back to the rest of the room. And I remember hearing all these clashing noises, like these gongs and bells and whistles and sirens and pans and clashing noises. It's just this big cacophony of sounds taking place. And I'm confused about what's going on. And as I'm kind of opening my eyes, there's like a red glaze over my eyes. And everything is just red, and I'm scared and I panic. So I lay with my phone next to me, and I try to pick up my phone, and I'm trying to pick up my phone, and I pick it up, and I finally get it up. And because I'm scared, I'm trying to dial all these people in my contacts, right? And I try to call my mom, my dad. I try to call a spiritual director that I had that I knew at the time. Even like the Christian community that I knew on campus, like this guy who was also gay. I tried to call him. I'm trying to call out for help. And I have I'm calling everybody, and my phone just melts in my hand. My phone just melts in my hand. And then I feel after that being pulled onto the floor by some sort of force. I'm pulled onto the floor. I hit the ground, and I have no other choice for a name to call on. And I just call on Jesus, and I say, Jesus, 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 Jesus. And immediately I wake up, right? Like I wake up in the dream, but then I also wake up, like everything goes white. I wake up, and then I also wake up in actuality. And I'm on the floor in real life as I was put onto the floor in my dream. And so I'm on the floor. I get back. I'm on my knees. I'm on my hands and knees. And I'm like breathing deeply, and I'm sweating. Like it's like the sweats. And I'm not sick, right? Like I don't have a fever or anything, but I'm like everything that was experienced in my dream, I was somehow experiencing in real life and in reality. And so I go and I try to get up. I like crawl over to the crawl and / run over to the light in my dorm room. I live kind of by myself. And I throw on my light. And I just remember leaning against the wall and thinking, what the heck was that? And I remember God clearly saying to me that I'm restoring you. Like in that moment, as I'm crawling back to the thing, but then also turning on the light, like God speaking to me saying that God wants to restore me. And God wants to do a new thing in me, and that I want you to be mine now. And I want you to follow me, and I'm going to do something great in your life. Follow me. And I just remember hearing that. And I remember, I mean, it's as clear as day, really understanding that was finally God, right? In my entire life's quest for searching for God, this is the first moment in my life where I actually hear from God for the very first time, right? Now, I do believe that God works preveniently, right? Even before we have knowledge of God, I believe God is already working. Because I believe that God loves us in that way, that God is always after us, even when we don't know it, that God is always pursuing and chasing after us. And I believe that there were probably lots of times God wanted to get my attention and speak to me, but for whatever reason, I was not listening. And I thought that maybe it was because of my pride, maybe because I thought God hated me, just because a lot of other people hate me, and I wanted to have my identities, and I wanted to have my other faith, and I wanted to have all these things. And I thought God would take that stuff away from me because God, for whatever reason, because God hated me, or because, for whatever other reason. And I just didn't want to run to God. I didn't want to acknowledge God. I didn't want to hear from God. I wanted my own stuff. And I just thought that just like the church wants to take this stuff away from me, God's going to take it away. And this is what I made myself. This is how I'm understanding myself. And why would you want to take that away? It's like all I got. And then I just remember understanding at that time, like, well, that's exactly what I want. Like God saying, that's exactly what I want. I want all you've got. Like, give me all you've got, because what I have in exchange is far better than anything you could give yourself. And I did. So in that same night, I took my Quran, I took my prayer blanket, my prayer rug.
In other words, when you found yourself on the floor in real life and on the floor still in that visionary dream experience, how much of it is it continuing to be real life / visionary, or how much of it is you now in reality and making these conscious decisions, realizing that God is intervening with you right then?
Yeah. So first it was in my dream. Uh, and so first it was in my dream when I'm put onto the floor, right? All that is still in my dream. And when I say Jesus, 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 it's still in my dream. But then, like, I wake up in my, because all this is happening in my dream, and this is always hard to explain. So I actually wake up in my dream, but nothing happens, right? Like, it's just white. But then I actually wake up, like, in reality, and I'm on the floor having cold sweats, right? And I run. Well, before that, that's when God was speaking to me when it was all white. God had begun speaking those words to me about how God is going to restore me. And like, I'm the God you've been searching for the whole time. And from that point, I wake up and then I run, turn on my light, and I'm like, okay, God, what was that? Like, and so at that moment, I say, God, like, you've got it. Like, you've got it. Like, I heard you clearly. I understand clearly what you want to do and who you are. I believe, like, this is actual God, right?
You're not holding back.
I'm not holding back anymore. Not at this point. Not at this particular moment.
What was inspiring this trip to the dumpster? What things were you taking? Is this a scary fear of God? Is this desire to serve him? What's inspiring these next? Describe the next actions and what's inspiring it.
Yeah, what a beautiful question, bro. So I was very prideful, just like how many people today and even then were. I had pride flags in my room. I had, oh my goodness, you're talking about rocks, like amethyst stones. And like I practiced, well, I didn't really practice, but I had these ideas of dabbling in other various forms of spirituality. So like I had like rocks and stones all around my room and amethyst and like emeralds and all that stuff. I also have like a prayer rug. I have like Bibles. It was a ball of confusion.
You wanted your spiritual bases covered.
I was like, look, I want to make sure I'm covering all bases just in case. So I remember taking everything I had, right? And I remember even taking a Bible. I'm ashamed to say that, but I remember taking all that, right? So like I wanted all those identities, right? Because for me, the sermon is connecting about how God is restoring gatekeepers. And I mean, there was a ton of stuff being said as far as like what we need to come into the knowledge of and what we need to do, what we need to let go. But I don't know how to do that. So when I have this experience in my dream, I take everything I know about God. I take everything I know about myself. This is what I'm thinking, like not out of fear, but in awe of God, right? But then also it's like this moment of finally, right? It's like this revelatory moment where I'm like, finally, like it's God. Like I'm taking, like, this is how I looked.
Arms filled. Stack them up.
I'm like, finally, like, oh my God, like God, I'm sorry.
Clean house.
That's right. Like God, I'm sorry. Like I hear like, oh my God, like I'm happy, I'm excited, I'm filled with awe. I'm like, yes, I'm taking all this and I'm going to the dumpster with it.
It's a celebration, it sounds like.
Oh, I was excited. I was so excited because I finally felt like I had connected with God, mainly because this was the first time in my life I actually heard from God. And it was clear. It was clear. It was so crystal clear. And so I didn't want at that moment anything else to be a distraction to me. I didn't want anything else to cause any hindrance or barrier between me and the God that I know that spoke to me. And so I'm getting rid of all this stuff, my own identity, and I'm getting rid of my identity and all the other things that I tried to find myself identifying as. I had not yet at that point, not in that moment, I didn't let go of what was then like my sexual identity and my experience and my experiences and my attraction, like all that didn't go away, but all the more tangible things, right, that helped me to identify with those identities, I wanted to get rid of, and I want my room to be clear that I'm starting over. And because I'm hearing from God, it's like, I don't want any distractions. Like it's going to be me and God. Like he's going to tell me what he wants me to do. So I don't want anything else to inform that process.
Yeah, that's beautiful because so many, I think all of us, we don't necessarily believe in God. We believe in the ideas we've created about him. And it seems like a submission for you to say, hey, I don't want it from other sources. And that's why I don't think people should find it offensive that the Bible was in your arms when you were making that trip to the dumpster. I think to me, it symbolizes your submission saying, I want you who just spoke to me, not other people's ideas about you or my own ideas about you.
Yep, absolutely. That's exactly what it was. And from there, I went to the dumpster, and I remember being excited, right? And then I'm like being excited, but then also like, okay, I guess I'm doing this. I get to the dumpster, like I don't want anyone to find this stuff, right? And to get a hold of it. Cause I'm like, in this moment, I'm like, I don't want anybody else to have it because then they're gonna be stuck too. so I walk to like the farthest gas station I could on foot. And I throw it in the dumpster.
Get it off campus.
Get it off. Oh, yeah, it was certainly off campus. I got it off campus. And I remember this filth. I mean, you're talking about one of those big dumpsters behind a gas station, not like a little cute roadside garbage can that we have outside of our homes. Even those are pretty nasty. But you're talking about a filthy, disgusting trash can, dumpster bin, right? And I remember throwing all that stuff in it. And I remember like telling God, like, I'm about to trust you so much that I am willing to touch and to hug this nasty, filthy container. Because I'm telling you, I am ready, like, I don't know what else to do after this. So if I'm showing you how much you've got me right now, that when I let go from this, because I'll jump back in and get it, right? But you've got to let me know, God, that when I let go, it's got to be you. Like, it has got to be you who will inform and order my steps. It's got to be you who clarifies who I am, my identity. It's got to be you that sets the way straight for me to walk on. It's got to be you that transforms and renew me. It's got to be you that shapes me, that disciples me. It's got to be you that shows yourself more of who you are in this world. And the call that you have for me, it's got to be you, because every other voice is way too loud in my life. It has got to be you. And I remember taking a deep breath and letting the trash can go. And from there, it was this miraculous journey of being placed in contact with very loving Christians. Right, not like your conservative, super conservative and agenda-driven Christians, but these were people who just loved God and loved God's people and wanted to see people set free from their pain, shame, hurt, and sin. And God placed me in beautiful relationship with them and allowed me to cross paths with the most amazing Christians who were formative for me in my Christian journey. And it was from there where my life of faith began, and it's been a journey ever since. So
let me ask this: that day, the rest of the day, to where God, it's got to be you. It's got to be your voice. I don't know what's happening next. I'm letting go. How would you recognize him that day communicating with you, and throughout the course of those next few days?
Ask that one more time. Because how do I understand him?
Let me share with you a little bit what I'm trying to make sense of, because I always try to make sense. Well, what do I know? And sometimes people recognize a clear voice of the Spirit, almost like an audible voice. Some people just recognize impressions that help them feel a clarity in taking this action or that action. And sometimes people would recognize outward forces intervening on their behalf. What was it like for you? How would you recognize God's communication with you over the course of those next few days or weeks?
These are some of my favorite parts of the story, right? Because these are things that I like very rarely experience, only but like very few times, still to this day. But it was a deeply, like, I just like deeply squared, right? Spiritual experience. It was all spiritual, 100% spiritual. I heard very audible voices from God. It was this audible voice, but then also this indwelling spirit that I felt, right? And I remember even asking, like, is this the Holy Ghost? Like, I'm like, It's like I thought the Holy Ghost was a dance. Like I thought it was like what people do in Black church. So I'm not sure, but it was this deep indwelling. Like I felt protected, I felt safe, I felt guarded, I felt guided, right? And it was this indwelling of God's Spirit, but then it was also this voice that I would often hear. And then there will be times where God will show up tangibly through people and allow me to experience him through others. For example, this is one of many, and I'll share two so that it connects. The moment that happened, the very next day, well, the moment after that happened, rather, the very next day is a campus-wide Bible study that the cool kids go to, right? Like the football players, and it really is the
There we go, the cool kids church.
It is the cool kids Bible study on our college campus. Let me tell you, like all of the I'm serious. I'm so serious. All the popular kids go to this. The football team.
How do they dress real nice?
They did. Like everybody, like it was the Bible study, and it was on campus. It was that deal. And so I remember I'm being led to go to that Bible study because everybody talked about it. It was with this really cool pastor who has since passed away. God rest his soul. He led so many wonderful people to Christ who are still Christians to this day. Oh, God bless him. So he led the Bible study, and I remember attending the Bible study. God told me to ask the friend who I had encountered the night of that garbage can experience. Like some people have the burning bush. I have the garbage can experience.
There we go. I'm glad it wasn't a dumpster fire.
That's right. And so I call that friend. I asked him, I said, there's a Bible study on campus. Like, is it like, I'm trying to get the time and date. I get the time and date. I go to the Bible study. And after attending the Bible study, they have this small group, that meets afterwards. Or I think they broke into small groups. I don't remember. I think they broke into small groups after Bible study. This particular small group stayed after in what was the conference center to our football facility complex. So they stayed in like this little auditorium, and it was about 12 to 15 people there. And I decided to stay with them. Now they all know each other. So they know that I'm new. A lot of them know that I'm new, but the pastor leaves. Like the pastor was long gone because we're in small group at this time.
Yeah.
And so I tell the people who are in the group, I say, hey guys, like, I think I became a Christian. Like, I don't really want to be.
I think this just happened.
Let me just tell you what happened. And I'm explaining this to them. And they're like, people are crying. They're like, wow. And they're like, this happened last night. And I'm like, yeah, bro, last night. Like, this happened last night. And they're like, wow, that is so amazing. Well, the pastor comes back, and I don't even have it here with me. It's upstairs. But the pastor comes back, and he's gone for at least 30 minutes at this point. But he comes back into the room, and he could have gone to any of the small groups, right? But he comes back to our small group, and he says to the group, he says, is there a person new to faith here? And everybody's we are all having a spiritual experience, not just me, right? Mm-hmm. Like each of us are having a spiritual experience because the pastor comes in and literally says the exact thing that, hey,
he's going to sneak in from time to time.
So, no, that's totally fine.
In other words, as you're there with the group, I recognize it now. I wonder if you had the words at the time. The Holy Ghost was moving on that group who were connecting with your testimony.
Absolutely.
And the pastor felt it and audibly said out loud the impressions coming from the Holy Ghost.
Absolutely. 100%. Well, he's carrying with him. He's like this. He has his Bible, and he says, there's a person new to faith. He's like stunned himself. He said, there's a person new to faith here.
Almost like he read a text message and is responding to the message that he got.
Almost as if someone texted him. Almost as if somebody texted him. And this is 2008. So yeah, we had text messages, but I can assure you no one was texting during that time, because we were like, everybody was trying to figure out like, who is this new guy to the faith and how do we help him? And because this Bible study is so big, the pastor doesn't even know a lot of the kids in this group. Like, he knows some of them in the whole entire thing, but to the kids that are here, he doesn't know half of them or most of them really. But he comes back and he says, is there somebody new to faith here? This is the Bible. And then legitimately a few of the women in the group begin crying. And he's like, and he says to me, well, he says to the group, who's new to faith? The Holy Spirit just put you in my spirit and told me to come back. But before I came here, the Holy Spirit told me to go to my car and grab this Bible. Now, Jacob, remember, I just thrown away all my I had thrown away everything.
Oh, I need to have one of those.
That's right. It's like, that's interesting. He comes back with this Bible and he says, the Holy Spirit told me to go to my car and get this Bible. And he said, whoever the person is here, you don't have to speak up, but I want to tell y'all this first. And he says, the Holy Spirit told me to get this Bible, and I just bought this Bible. Now, this is the most beautiful, I guarantee you, like, this is the most beautiful Bible I have ever seen. And I've seen a few nice Bibles, and even to this day, still the most beautiful Bible. Like, it has like letter embroidery with like paisley, with like Bible. It is the most beautiful Bible I've ever seen.
It is the word done up right.
It is the word done up right. Like, it has a three-piece suit on it. And he says, this is a everyday life. This is the Everyday Life and Truth Bible. And he said, this Bible cost me $80. And it's also the most expensive Bible that I ever bought. He said, I haven't even cracked the page in it. And I was so excited about this Bible to have it because it was beautiful. And then I've always wanted this iteration of the Bible. And he says to me, the Holy Spirit, as I was driving home, told me to come back and to give this Bible away, because the Bible that I had purchased was not for me, but it was for someone else. And he immediately felt this conviction, but also this great sense of blessedness, because he was getting ready to gift this most beautiful, most expensive Bible that he had ever purchased and had away to somebody who was new to faith. And he said, okay, who is that person? And like, I just boo-hoo. I boo-hoo. And it's clear at this point who the person is. And he comes and he lays his hand on my back.
In other words, you're sobbing.
I'm sobbing. I'm sobbing.
And help us understand. I know at those times, it's oftentimes kind of an overload of gratitude towards God that inspires.
It is. Is that what it was? Yep, that is exactly. I was just getting ready to say that. That's exactly what it was. That's exactly what it was. And Minister Chris, he comes, he places his hand on my back. He takes the Bible, he places it and shoves it into my lap and just begins praying for me and praying for God to guide me through this everyday life, spiritual Bible, that God would inform my steps and order my steps, that God would allow me to walk in his truth, that God would reveal the truth to me, that God would just constantly walk with me on my journey to continued faith. And I still to this day have that Bible. And I remember when I first began unpacking the Bible in a real way. I remember just wanting nothing but to come back from the cafeteria and read my Bible and experience God and ask God questions about himself and about the Bible and about like what he's doing with Jacob and like, why is he wrestling? And what is this? Am I wrestling too? Or asking questions about, or leaving class and not really being interested in the content, but just really wanting to just run back to my room after class and just read my Bible. Just this zeal.
Hit us with this. As you're searching for answers and using the scriptures to get those answers, how would you recognize truth coming from God? Did it feel like impressions that would fall into place, or almost like audible voices where you could hear it clearly? Help us understand the communication and how you recognized it in this part of your journey.
For sure. These were definitely impressions from others. Impressions from others, but at a much later time, and when I could when I was able to answer or ask questions of others. But it was this moment where I was hearing audible voices, but then also feeling like I was guided through the scriptures spiritually. Like in an inward spiritual sense, I felt God giving me revelation. And even when I would read scripture or read a chapter or a verse, at this point, it was full chapters, right? But I remember just stopping and wanting to clearly understand. And I would read a chapter, pray, and like not pick it up. And then I would, some days I would go to sleep and God would reveal to me in my dreams, right? Right. So this is not new. Like God moving through dreams is not a new concept, right? And so God will reveal to me through my dreams, like what he meant through the scripture, like what he was doing with Noah, like the type of relationship he was seeking to have with us in the garden, like the whole process of redemption that is seen throughout the Old Testament, throughout the Hebrew scriptures, right? God wanting to love us, like that's the whole point. And God trying to pursue his people was what was being revealed to me. And God revealing, like, this is how I'm pursuing you. Like, you're in this story too. And that stuff began to be made clear to me. And it was in Bible studies or personal just conversations with other pastors and spiritual leaders at the time where I was able to ask these questions, and they would be able to provide deeper understanding. But not even wanting to trust them even, I would go back to my dorm room or just go back into my private corners and just be in prayer. And I would fast, not even knowing that I was fasting because I didn't understand that whole concept, right? But just not wanting to eat or drink or just really wanting to consume scripture and God and have God guide me and hear audibly from God was all that I wanted. So it was a mixture of dreams and audible voices, but then also deep internal revelation and insight just through the wisdom of the text that I was able to just, see and come into the understanding of.
And now you're feeling yourself on fire for it. Did you just lose interest in the identities that you felt like the identities that you were embracing before this? Did they drift away? What happened?
I have no clue.
Because a lot of people will teach a certain version of. Let me make sure. Don't let me interrupt you before I give thoughts. You had thoughts. Roll with those.
Well, I was just gonna say, I can't tell you where those desires went. It's hard even today to tell you what happened to the desires. I can articulate what, right? So I know that in the midst of me journeying with God, the only thing that mattered to me was getting to know God and more of who God was and getting to know who I was, right? So a lot of the relationships that I had with people who were part of the LGBTQ plus community, people who I even attended mosque with, everyone who I associated with, I had to keep at bay because they were going to be voices in my head. And I didn't want for those people to be voices. I just really wanted to hear from God. And as I continued to journey with God, desires changed. There was just a shifting, a spiritual, but also natural shifting in desires that just begin to change. There was this sense of, I felt like I was being made whole and pure. And it wasn't like God was converting me from like homosexuality to heterosexuality. It was just this process of holiness that I felt I was undergoing, where God is shaping me and making me God's own. And on the other end of that was desires for a wife and desires for a family and desires for dedicating my family to God and to Christ as well. But the desires changed. They drifted. They fell off. And I could say more about that, but I know you had some thoughts.
No, it was right there because I know there's a lot of people who preach some version of that's just how you are, so fully embrace it and God's totally good with it. And what I'm hearing from you is not like condemn Donovan because he shouldn't feel like that. It felt like you were feeling such an increase of love and desire to know God that the changes just happen naturally?
They just happen naturally. I even say it this way, Jacob. I tell people I was comfortable and happy where I was, right? I was perfectly fine being, and this is all like I'm being cynical here, right? Like I wasn't asking God the questions of like, God, what about this gay thing, right? What do you say about that, right? There was none of that because it really was my true self offered completely to God, right? It was myself offered as a full sacrifice before God, not wanting God to like answer these questions and to change. Well, I did ask some questions, but like not God to change me or to like God, ooh, take away the desire. It was none of that. It was just, hey, I'm journeying with God and this is what I'm doing. And however I come out after God is done with, well, God is still working on me. But none of that matters in my journey with God. Like I'm not seeking to keep any identity or to keep any theology or to keep any ideology or keep any other faith or I'm not wanting to grab on with or to take any other things with me on the journey. It's just like, I just want God to show, yeah, God, you do whatever work you see. And it was really honest and truly deep spiritual work through trauma that God helped me work through with trauma and acknowledging things that were in my past. And God even helping me to pinpoint some areas in my life where things had first began, right? Like, here is where this happened, Donovan. Like, here's what happened, right? And here's how that kind of got messed up, right? It was God dealing with me and showing me in those deep places, the places where I was broken, not how I was, how do I say this in a way that is not that I was broke or that I was,
He's showing you what events in your life shaped where you were at that time.
Yeah, how I arrived to this transformative experience, but then also the places that were deep voids that were covered up with other stuff or that just had gone unacknowledged or things that I didn't understand that informed how I started a journey as a gay male and in Islam. And it was God showing me like, here's how you arrived there. Like, here's what went wrong. Here's what went unacknowledged.
And now let me ask this. Are there any of these voids that God helped you identify that you feel are worth saying for others who might be experiencing the same voids?
Yeah. And this would go saying that I realize some people won't have the same voids. Yeah. Like that's just the reality. But if there are people who have some similar voids, it began with childhood trauma, number one, though this is not in this order, but these are just a few of them. So the childhood traumatic experience of potential sexual abuse from my teacher, right? The inappropriate touches. It was also having been sexualized as a child from other family members, where it was this early exposure to sexual touches and things that felt good from my male cousins and male family members, or that translated into sort of this attraction and this attraction to men, because those experiences that felt good at that time translated to these experiences feel nice from men. So then the attraction to men is fostered. And this is how I understand pleasure in a sexual dynamic is from men. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So in other words, the experiences in those formative years and prior to the puberty formative years had a more dramatic effect as you developed.
Correct. And so it only led into wanting to have more of those experiences, because that was my early experience with sexual exposure. And it's not that like I was like being sacrificed like in my cousin's basement, right? It's not like I do realize and respect that some people actually have those experiences, but it was these moments where like kids are alone and your kid cousin touches you and you're like, oh, this is fun. And this is what's supposed to happen. And then after that, then the adult experience, and then the onset of male attraction thereafter. And just wanting to feel that pleasure and attention from men. The other void that was filled was that I didn't receive a lot of attention, attention and celebration from men, or celebration from men. So in life, like I didn't identify with a lot of the men and boys that I grew up with. We just were not the same. And so because I wasn't really accepted in their circles, I always desired to, like, I wanted them to want me. And so that desire for them, but then also for them to want me, I think was confused in my formative years as well, of wanting that kind of brotherly attraction from men and them not giving that to me. And I think it just was distorted in my own mind. And I recognize that that's not everybody's experience, but that certainly was mine, was that there was a distortion of what the attraction to men was, and why I felt like I needed that male attention in my life, on top of the other sexualized experiences. And then after that, I think it was curiosity into the lifestyle, right? And not having anyone to help me understand the dynamic of what sex is, of what homosexuality is, and only relying on my friend group to help expose me to it. So it's kind of like curiosity, and then curiosity that led to experimentation, and then experimentation that led to, I'm sorry, I would say before that, curiosity that led to, yeah, I think I said it that way. Yeah. Curiosity that led to experimentation, experimentation that led to like an ongoing practice. And then after the ongoing practice, it just became a habit. Like I just was seeking after the habit. And then with anything like a habit, it just becomes your lifestyle. It becomes something that becomes a part of you now. It's no longer a thing that you were once curious about. Like, oh, I wonder how a cigarette tastes, right? And then before you know it, then people know you to be a cigarette smoker.
A pack or more a day.
A pack or more a day.
So take us through this. You're seeking to hear the voice of God. You're losing interest in, or less interest in the studies that you're officially going to school for, and more interest in hearing God's word. How did you notice the desires for a family and children? How did those desires and how did that play out in trying to understand God's plan for you to have that?
Yeah, for sure. So I remember I was at a place of scripture where where God was speaking to Abraham, and God was telling Abraham that it began before that, to be fruitful and multiply. And I really didn't understand that. So I prayed to God about, regarding that. Like, what does that mean to be fruitful?
Be careful what you pray for.
That's right. Be careful what you pray for. And so I'm asking, like, how is it that, and at this point, I'm actually becoming quite mature in my faith, but I'm really wanting to understand this, like, be fruitful and multiply thing, right? And this is still even in my singleness. And I'm asking God, like, what does that mean for me? Like, what does that mean for me as an non-identifying same-sex attraction guy, gay male, but straight male at this time? But like, what does it mean for me to do that? Like, would a woman accept me as having had these experiences, and would she accept me how I am now and who I am now? And I just remember praying for that. God to give me clarity as to how he's calling for me to be fruitful. And so he gave me two ways. He said, well, I want you to be fruitful in your ministry, right? I come first, right? Like fruit that you bear and the fruit that you help to bear in others, right? So that they could bear fruit for me and for therefore others as well is the fruit that I want you to focus on first, right? And the other thing is God's desire to see disciples be made from the family dynamic. And I remember praying and asking God, like, well, God, if a wife is like what I'm like, if a wife is something that's in my path, like God, I'm open to that. Like I wasn't closed to it, but I was open to it. But I began to notice, how do I say this? Yeah, so I was praying about being fruitful and multiply. God showed me to multiply this, and God said, yeah, it can be through a family that you could be multiplied too. And I remember wanting to be a blessing to God and say, God, like I want to give you disciples of my own. Like I want to give you people who bear your own name too. Like that comes from me. Like I want to do that. And I remember wanting to honor God in that fashion. But I remember like having those thoughts of like, well, I'm never going to be able to do that because like these were my lifestyles, or this was my lifestyle prior. And I remember God had to deal with me through a little bit of that trauma too. And then just almost like naturally, like it was almost spiritually as well. I just noticed these desires for a wife, like my desires for men changed into desires for women. And I just began praying for a woman who would understand my journey, and a woman who also loved God in the same capacity that I do, and that together we would serve God and that we would honor God with disciples, and we would honor God with being fruitful, and we would honor God with our lives as well, and that our lives will continue to be a testimony. And so legitimately, it was just, I didn't notice at that point that my desires had changed. Like, of course you do notice, like, I'm not having desires for this guy or like this, like it, but it's like genuine desires. It's like, wow, like, well, this woman in my study group is attractive. And so, yeah, my desires just have begun to change. I didn't pray for those desires. Like, I think that that's just too much of like conversion therapy, and I don't believe in that.
Yeah.
Some people do.
Like,
I just,
the conversion to God is changing other aspects of your life.
I agree. I do agree. I agree. But then they use like shock therapy and
no, LDS background has some horror stories with that.
Yeah, that's not my way, right? That's not how I experienced it.
And see, the reality is, I'll at least give this commentary. I know from many people that I've known to where the drug addiction gets taken away miraculously, or other things get taken away where Jesus says, that's mine. I paid the price. I'm taking it from you. It is never the process of let me make you feel bad and guilty. Sometimes we'll have some of that remembrance to keep us safe.
Yeah.
But it is a joy. It is a celebration. It is a power, the miracle of the atonement provided through Christ. In other words, what I hear described through you is God's love being a part of how you are changed. Yes. Rather than let's make you feel ashamed for things that you've done in your past.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what it is, right? Like there was no clinic or facilitation of counseling services or therapy services. There was no, and I'm not bashing that stuff, right? I don't personally, right? That's not my story. But it really was God's love that first transformed me, that renewed me. Like I was reborn. I was born again. I was given new life through Jesus Christ, right? And then out of journeying with God came this revelation of, oh, my desires have changed now. Like I didn't even realize that God was working on that stuff. And it's right. I didn't notice that I had even abandoned those lifestyles. I was so caught up into my identity in Jesus Christ, my wanting to follow God and to really just be in God's bosom, right? That I was no longer concerned about what could be taken away from me or what wasn't a part of my life anymore. And it was through God's love. There were, as I'm recognizing this, it's like, like, God, you really did a work in me, because I don't realize this stuff, right? I don't even realize that this has changed. And now I'm finding myself with brand new desires, right? Just like when we come to faith before Christ, we may have desires for other things, but then once we experience the transformative power of Christ through God's love, then our desires for God, but then also for other things, change as well. And it's the same thing. That's my experience. It's like my desires on the other end were just different.
How did you learn that God was preparing a woman to be partnered up with you and bring children into the world?
Yeah. I was praying for her. I legitimately was praying as I noticed my desires changing. I remember I knew that I always wanted a family. I grew up in a family dynamic. I didn't have a horrible family. Like, there were some hiccups that we had and some quirks, but like, we had a great family, and we saw great representations of family. And I knew that I always wanted a family, and I wanted to raise children as well. I knew that I wanted to serve God, and I just had a jacked up journey getting there, but it's a part of my story and I'm proud of it. But
in the humble way, you're proud of it.
That's right. That's right. And so, but I began praying for a wife who would understand my journey and my story, but that more importantly served God, and that would understand how God would grace her for a person like me. And so I had begun praying, well, God, she's got to understand like my journey, my story, and she's got to accept that. And she has to be graced for that and what that means from now on. Because we do hear stories about former gay people who enter back into the lifestyle, and it's almost as like, see, I told you they were gay. And it's like, well, I don't believe that, right? When you're transformed by the power of Christ, there's something different that's at work here, right? Now, I do understand that some of us fall short and we have shortcomings because of our temptation. I get that. But that's not what this is. And I'm not saying that I'm better than that, but that isn't what that was, like a person who's covering up one lifestyle in order to live this one. No, I am completely redeemed. And as a result of my redemption and my saving, and God saving me, I'm able to live this life. That's what that is. It's a complete transition. It's a total different experience, conversion and transformation. And so I was praying to God that someone would understand that, but then also praying for a woman who would have the heart of God like how I do, who would understand these deep spiritual things as well, because I knew that it would take a person like that. And as I began to pray for that person, meanwhile, my current wife, I've always had one wife, my current wife was having a similar experience. Now, she was not lesbian or anything like that, but she was having a spiritual experience to faith on her own. She had grown up in church, but she didn't really have. She grew
up with the traditions, but not the conversion.
Not the conversion. It wasn't in her heart. That's a great way to put that. She didn't have the conversion. And it wasn't until she was leading up to when she met me, God had been working on her heart, and God had been really dealing with her and with some deeply spiritual things. But then when she met me, and she was sort of mature up to this point as well, but it wasn't until she met me where she was able to see, now that is God's transformative power. Like, I get it now. And it was for her, and she describes it this way, this was a greater awakening for her to really see the transformative nature and power and love of God and Christ in our lives. And so as she was experiencing that on this end and seeing it and having it heard or articulated through me, was like, it was eye-opening and groundbreaking for her faith. and for our journey together, because we then would enter into moments where we would have Bible studies and conversations about God, and journeys about the both, and conversations regarding the both of our faith journeys and how we got to the place where we, currently are. And we uncovered that legitimately almost at the same time we were undergoing a spiritual journey 2 years before we met. And then the moment we met, we were inseparable.
It sounds like, did you guys recognize that you're being prepped for one another?
Yes, absolutely. 100%. 100%. So if ever we ask the question, and we don't, but if ever we needed to, we told ourselves that we would remind ourselves of this, that if ever we find ourselves questioning whether or not we were to be together, we would remember that it was always God who orchestrated and facilitated us becoming husband and wife, that it was always God from the moment we began our spiritual journeys to the moment that our lives intersected. And that even up to this point, that it has always been God.
Will you describe for me? Tell me, how old are them kiddos? You got a boy and a girl.
Yeah. So Aubrey is 5. Davin is 2. Davin, of course. Sorry.
Those are such precious ages.
Oh, they are. They are so much fun. And yeah, they are so much fun. They're the highlight of our lives. And well, God is the highlight of our lives, but they certainly are another highlight of our lives, and a ball of joy in our home. And we too, like we promised, we're taking care of them, and we're discipling them, and we're helping them to develop that good spiritual fruit as well. And we want them to have the foundation that both my wife and I, we didn't have. And now that we know better, we're doing better. And because we want to serve God, and we want to see our kids serve God too. Because this isn't like a magical story that's in a magical book. It's the actual story of a real God who, with real love, real hope, real redemption, real grace, and real transformative power.
I feel like your testimony is expressed throughout this journey. Here's what I oftentimes do when I feel like, okay, this is an appropriate time to help the landing gear come down.
Yeah.
I'll ask somebody's testimony of Jesus Christ, but I feel it throughout your journey. Then let me ask it this way.
Yeah.
Will you describe what is it like inside of your home and outside of your home to live a testimony?
Wow. That is a powerful question. To live a testimony of Jesus Christ in my home, oh, wow, that's such a great question, is that we get to tell our children and tell one another the ways that we are experiencing Christ each and every day, that we are seeing signs and echoes of God's voice. Like we are intentional about the ways in which we see and experience God, and the ways that we see Jesus speaking to us and through us each and every day, so that we could always have a testimony of how we see God at work. Because we explain oftentimes that there are so many times throughout our lives where we could go not acknowledging God and not living open to how God is always speaking to us. But we choose to be intentional about seeking God, number one, but then also being aware of God's presence. And then also being aware of how Christ is shaping us. And that testimony is inside of our home of how we see God, how we experience Jesus Christ, how we're growing, how we're not growing, the places where we're stuck. And that's the testimony in our home, growing in holiness, seeking to be pure and have righteousness to be at the forefront of our family, and to be agents of God's grace and love, to be loving to others. It's not about nicety or good citizenship. Like, that comes as a result of being a Christian, but that's not what we're seeking, right? We're seeking to be Christ representatives in the world. We're seeking to be image bearers of God and we foster that in our home. And that is the testimony of what happens in our home. I'll give an example, and then I'll answer the second part of that question. So one of the micro churches that I participate in, but there's a leader in that micro church, but so they lead it, but I visit sometimes. And so I visited the micro church, and for the first time, my daughter came with me, and it's in a retirement community, in a community that has a ton of needs, and in a community that really is seeking after God in their later ages. My daughter goes with me to this micro community of 55 of people who are 55 and better. And she's able to ask questions about their life and their journey with Jesus. And like, did you serve Jesus when you were growing up? And like, who's Jesus to you today? Mm-hmm. And to even ask questions about like, how are you experiencing Jesus now as a person who is well in age? But then also to be in service to them, to ask them, how can I pray for you? Or to serve them coffee, right? To go and do life with them in that way is precious and is deep. But then there's also us being the hands and feet of Christ in the world in a real way. And so on our drive back home, I explained to her, Aubrey, you know, this too is a part of being a Christian. Like we talk about this in our home, and we witness Jesus Christ shaping us and molding us in our home. But this is a display of how that's done when we step outside of this door. And so into the second question, that's how our family displays the testimony of Jesus Christ in our life outside of our home, is that we're in service to those who we're called to, and that we're put in connection to and in network with the micro churches that we lead, the micro churches that we visit. Every place we go, we're a witness, but then also the people who we intentionally disciple and that we come into relationship with and connection with. We share what God has done for us. And I'm also open about my testimony as well. For a long time, I had been closed to it in my journey to becoming a pastor. But God dealt with me real good. He called me by all three of those names. And
he's being serious.
That's right. He really been serious. So God called me by all three of those names, including the name of being his son, and told me to open my mouth. During Lent, after fasting, the revelation that I received from God was three things: open your mouth, tell them what I've done for you, and do not be afraid. And do not be afraid. And that's what led to, number one, me sharing that testimony. And then that testimony opening up doors for me to be able to share what God has done for me. Because I believe that God is wanting to do that for others, and I can't hold this testimony back. And my wife too, it's just so strange that this is all happening together, because my wife, she has a chronic illness, and we had a whole faith journey with her as well through that. And God had also charged her with, share your story, share with the people what I have done for you. And it almost recalls, and I'm wrapping it up, it recalls for me the moment where
you got no time limit on this.
Okay.
If there's hot sauce left in the bottle, pour it out.
Pour it out. It recalls for me the moment throughout the Old Testament. I'm thinking of Exodus, where God, well, even before Exodus, even like with Noah, like after they have gone through these experiences where God has brought them from places, God tells them, especially the Israelites after the Exodus, tell them my story. Like, tell the story in your family and everywhere you go about what I have done for you. That just chokes me up every time I think about that. That God speaking that to me is not a new thing. That God for centuries has been telling his people to tell people what I have done for you. And we live into that. And we cannot hold that back. And as a family, as people, as Christians, that is our charge. That is constantly a charge for us. And that's the cross that we carry, right? Is to tell people what God has done for us. And because we carry that cross, to include why Jesus has something to do with it while we're carrying that cross.
Donovan Archie.
Yeah.
you glow with testimony.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And I want to thank you again. I'm going to make sure that if people have questions or any other way, I'm making sure the links are down here. But I want to thank you for living your testimony and sharing your story here on the Disciple of Christ podcast.
It's been a joy. Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it.